This is Stop Eating My Popcorn, the movie review and discussion show on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I've just finished watching Tim Burton's Frankenweenie. So, the previous movie that I watched was Corpse Bride, and that had a core set of themes like what is the true meaning of love and obligation, responsibility, identity, and purpose, which it was able to explore clearly through the course of the story, and it went to a final resolution at the end. So even though the movie was very flawed, the characters were very shallow, the fact that there was a small number of key themes which were driven forward through the plot meant that it was a good movie. I really enjoyed it. Frankenweenie has too many different ideas. All of the ideas are not very good. They're all cliches that have been ripped from Hollywood that would get sins on cinema sins. None of them are explored in a unique or interesting way. They're all just basically copy and paste jobs. There are too many themes going about the place. Most of them don't get resolved, and the whole movie just becomes a mess that has no real purpose or drive or anything. So the first thing, the establishment of the world in which this story takes place doesn't really work, because it looks like it's an old-fashioned suburban America, maybe in the 50s or 60s or 70s, where it's got conservative values, conservative structures, tradition, religion, school, government. So this world was clearly deliberately done by Tim Burton. He didn't just pick it for a modern-day American town. There must have been a reason to place it a generation in the past. And yet, when you actually look at the town as a living organism, it wasn't explored at all. It's not like Pleasantville, where you actually can feel and understand and know that town. This town in Frankenweenie is almost a cardboard setting. You can see it on the outside, but as soon as you explore it in any depth, it is just shallow and empty. So, themes that get brought up, do not get properly explored, are just copy and paste jobs stolen from other places. Let's go through them. First of all, parents trying to tell children what to do, where parents have this established view of what they think their children ought to be and do, but their children have their own identity and meaning and desires and goals. And it eventually comes to a loggerheads where the two value systems clash, and the actual future and vocation and career of this child will be won by either of these two parties. That theme gets brought up at the beginning of the movie, and it does not get explored at all, and it doesn't go anywhere. Second of all, the main character Victor is introduced as a talented, eccentric weirdo who has these incredible ideas about the world but doesn't have a place in society in which he can feel comfortable and really explore. Most of his talents and gifts are unappreciated. That's an interesting idea, but again, it's introduced in the first 10 minutes of the movie and it is never explored again, and because of the way that the plot is structured, it means that Victor is spending so much time doing things and being around other people that he never actually appears as this talented, eccentric weirdo loner ever again. And so that theme never goes anywhere and doesn't get explored. The plot is a mess. There's so many different threads that are brought into place, and none of them go anywhere. So, there is the issue of the mayor, who is wanting to protect his image of the town being nice and peaceful and calm, and he notices that Victor is being too weird and trying to do his own thing, and he's not following proper conventions, and he harasses Victor, saying, "You better not step out of line, because I need to make sure that the town follows my system." Now that's an interesting idea, and it never goes anywhere. Then, in the middle of the movie, we see the PTA politics, where the science teacher gets removed because the parents are scared of the sort of things that he's teaching their kids. Now, that doesn't get explored either. Are we to imagine that this town is afraid or hates science? Is that sort of like a metaphor or an allegory of middle America who hates science and doesn't want to face up to reality? I don't know, because that idea is only ever mentioned in this meeting, this PTA meeting, and doesn't come up before or since. And so the question of what is the meaning of science, what purpose does it have for us, and what role should it play in our schools, again, does not get properly explored at all. It's just there for a moment and then it disappears. Next, it's the question of the politics of the schoolyard. So you see these school kids competing with each other over the science fair, and there's a lot of gossip and rumors about who's doing what for their experiment in the fair. And that whole realm of social activity, of schoolyard politics, the way that kids will compete with each other for access and rights and praise and awards, that can be very exciting and very interesting. But because the plot goes in so many different areas, it means that the school kids competing with each other isn't able to go anywhere, and instead all it does is set up the plot of the final battle. So those school kids don't actually have a role, they don't seem to be actually doing anything meaningful, they're just there to make sure that we have a final event. So there are a couple of features of when Victor reanimates Sparky that get shown for a brief moment and then don't appear again. And I don't know why Tim Burton would have bothered to put them in the first place. So first of all, Sparky's body parts falling off. So as Sparky is reanimated and he runs around happy, his tail and his ear falls off and then has to get stitched back up. Now, that could be a metaphor to show that reanimating a corpse will never work because the body keeps decaying, and while you have a fleeting chance of being reunited with your animal, eventually the thing will decay. But that doesn't come up again. It was there just those few moments and it never appears again in the entire story. Why would you include that in if it wasn't going to play an important role in Sparky's storyline or the plot of the movie overall? On a similar theme, there's the issue of Sparky being regenerated through the electricity. So after Victor has reanimated and brought Sparky back to life, Sparky runs around for a while, but then stops running around, starts to look tired and exhausted, and then Victor attaches electrical cables to Sparky and plugs him into the power, and then rejuvenates Sparky so that he becomes buoyant and excited again. So that's an interesting theme. The idea that reanimation can happen, but you have to constantly worry about regenerating the systems that brought the animal or the person back to life. But that never happens again. It was just there for that one scene, and this whole idea of a reanimated person running out of energy and needing electricity to gain back their life doesn't get explored or even touched on again. So, by the end of the movie, you could supposedly say that there were two major themes that were running through the storyline. The first is the idea of trying to regain a lost love. That Victor, through a tragic accident, lost Sparky and has tried to commit an immoral act by bringing him back to life. And there are a few moments where characters explicitly say that this is an unnatural and a freakish thing. And so the idea is then that humans have stepped into the realm of the gods by trying to manipulate nature beyond what humans ought to. Now, that idea of trying to regain a lost love has been explored before, particularly in the Time Machine movie. Now, the Time Machine did it really well because every time he went back in time to try to prevent the accident which killed his wife, some other tragic accident would occur which killed his wife. And so he was left to the conclusion that fate had destined his wife to die and that no amount of manipulating nature would ever stop her and bring her back. And so there's this realization that we as humans are mortal creatures, that we all must meet our maker eventually, that death is an inevitable part of who we are and that we have to embrace it. We can't hide away from it. The idea that immortality is actually a poison that's driving us into insanity and driving us to try to create abominations, that it was really well explored in movies like The Time Machine. But in this movie, not only do we not see the tragedy of trying to reanimate a dead corpse and to regain a lost love, but it actually ends up being successful. So at no point when Victor reanimates Sparky does Sparky end up dying or not accepting his love or considering himself unreal. Instead, it's completely successful. It's the sort of happy ending that everyone gets what they want that you would expect from an episode of Sesame Street or something. This is not serious storytelling. Serious storytelling is about tragedy, about dealing with heartbreak and being a human who is going to suffer throughout their lives. This movie, because everyone gets a happy ending, because at no point does Sparky ever die, but instead remains a reanimated corpse till the very end of the movie, it suggests that humans are actually going to be capable of overcoming mortality and actually becoming gods. Now, there is an interesting moment in the movie when Sparky runs off. So he's in the attic, Victor's parents come up, and then they discover Sparky, and that drives Sparky to run away, and then Victor later meets up with Sparky in the graveyard, and Sparky is there huddled against his old grave. Now, that seems like it's the old idea that a reanimated corpse has discovered that they are an abomination of nature and have been driven into a state of madness because they feel like they don't actually belong in this world, and they think there is a reason why I don't feel comfortable in this life that I've been brought into, and it's because I'm actually dead. So this idea of being unable to be truly brought back to life because you don't feel like it's right could be there. But instead, the resolution appears very quickly when just says a few comforting words to Sparky. Sparky, I think, sniffs or licks his hand, and then an entire plot piece is over, and Sparky returns to being right beside Victor throughout the rest of the movie. It just seems like Sparky running off was a necessary plot device in order to make sure that the house was empty so that the other school kids could go into Victor's family's house and steal his equipment, rather than being an actual core component of the plot, as if Sparky had lost a sense of identity in who he was. The other major theme that could have been well explored in this movie is the idea of what is the purpose of science. Because when Victor is talking to his old science teacher and they have a conversation, there is the idea that true science should be done for the purposes of love, but if you do it for selfish or inappropriate reasons, that will lead to abominations. And that theme does get explored reasonably well, because it is the abominations which actually cause the town to fall into a crisis, and the final climax is actually trying to bring those abominations under control. But the problem with that is that we don't actually understand why the other school kids, their science experiments, are committing an act of abomination as opposed to the reanimation of Sparky. I guess we're supposed to be believing that because they have selfish desires of wanting to attain the science fair prize, that they are not doing science for the meaning of love, and instead they're doing it for their own ends, and that is why their experiments are not working, and rather than reanimating an old corpse, they're creating these mutants. But then, if that were the case, then surely Sparky should have been destroyed at the end of the movie. Because if reanimating corpses is an unnatural thing to do because humans are imitating God by trying to play with life and death, then the very fact that Sparky continues to exist is evidence that the experiment was successful, and he's a constant reminder of what humans are capable of. So if reanimating corpses is universally wrong, then there needed to be some sort of way in which Sparky needed to be destroyed. And this seemed to be set up well in the final climax battle a couple of times, where Sparky picks up Victor and drags him out of the burning heap, but then is dragged back into the fire by the mutant cat-bat creature. And that seemed like a martyr's death, that Sparky had been able to commit the ultimate sacrifice, saving Victor from death and giving away his life in the process, and conveniently destroying the last piece of evidence of a reanimated corpse. But then, at the very end of the movie, they are able to save Sparky so that he's alive at the end of the movie. So in the end, the idea of reanimating a corpse is not in and of itself a bad thing, because we've got this living dog corpse with us in the town. And on the other hand, if you're going to say that science should be done for the purposes of love and not for selfish reasons, and the reasons the mutants were created was because it didn't have love, then that becomes a problem, particularly with the cat-bat monster, because that creature involved an animal that one of the school kids loved, but was turned into a mutant anyway. So in the end, it doesn't seem like it's actually an act of love so much that is causing science to be done right versus science going bad and turning into mutants. Rather, it just seems like Victor is the special one who knows how to do science well, while all the other kids don't have that same talent and are just going to be committing science bad. It just seems to be a bit of a Superman or Napoleon complex, where Victor is the chosen one who knows how to manipulate the laws of nature, while everyone else is immortal. So, Frankenweenie. It's a very bad movie. It is poorly paced. The world is very flat and hollow. None of the characters are given any sort of clear motivation. I think Victor is a very badly designed character. It's not clear what is driving him forward, whether it's a desire for fitting in, a desire for science and understanding the world and exploring the world and discovering it, or if it's love of his dog. He just seems to be a mixture of the three, and you just have one dominating the other depending on what the plot needs. And so he just becomes the plot device for the rest of the story. There is no overarching theme in the movie. Instead, you have lots of little themes that are never properly explored, are only brought up briefly and then disappear. And there are two overarching themes which end up being completed in a very unsatisfying and confusing way. In the end, the movie doesn't have a purpose or a meaning or a message. It is just a great big mess. I do not understand what Tim Burton is trying to say. He is not trying to explore unusual feelings or an unusual world or an unusual character or an unusual circumstantial situation. Instead, it just seems to be a strange copy and paste job where Tim Burton has taken the plot lines and plot devices of several other movies and tried to stick them all into this one movie, and it has become just an ugly mess. And so I cannot recommend this movie to anyone. No one should ever see it. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Stop Eating My Popcorn, the movie review and discussion show on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm Glenn Blank. Join me again next time for another movie review or discussion. Until then, goodbye.